Hey friends, this is Amy Price Bromberg, and I want to welcome you to the next episode of Priceless Backstories podcast. I have a treat for you today as I get to introduce you to my friend, Gabie Markley. Gabie was an athlete at Wright State University, and she was on the track team as a heptathlete. Gabie, tell us how many events did you compete in?
Outdoors, I competed in 7 events, and then indoors 5.
Yeah.
And then I also did the 4x4 and sometimes the open 400 and open high jump. So yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Yeah, so she's an incredibly well-rounded athlete. Gabie and I got to meet each other in her time at Wright State, and I was just really blessed to mentor her, disciple her, and get to know her, specifically in her time at Wright State as an athlete through Athletes in Action. So I'm really looking forward to giving you the opportunity to hear more of Gabie's story and just what the Lord has been doing in her life, as well as what it was like for her in her experience in college. So welcome to the show, Gabie.
Thanks, Amy. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, this is great. So the way we like to start the show is with the first 4. This gives our listeners an opportunity to get to know you better in some lighthearted, fun ways. So tell us about the favorite place that you have visited.
So my favorite place I visited, I actually lived there for 4 months, and I lived out by Lake Tahoe, right in the Sierra Nevadas in the valley, Carson Valley. And every weekend, pretty much, I would go over the mountains and watch the sunset on the beach of Lake Tahoe with some friends. And it was just such a beautiful, peaceful spot. You have the mountains and the water. And yeah, it was just like looking back, those are some of the best memories that I've had traveling out west.
Sweet. Where's Lake Tahoe?
So part of it's in Nevada and then part of it is in California.
Huh. So I've heard that you can, I don't know if this is true or not, but can you bike around like all of Lake Tahoe?
Yes, there's a road that goes all the way around. Bikers do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's totally a bucket list place for a future vacation.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Second question is, I know that you like hiking. We've had the opportunity to go on a lot of hikes, I feel like, over the years, and those are some really fun times. What is one of your favorite places you've gone and hiked? Just tell us about that experience as well.
Yeah, so this is a hard question to answer because I've been on a lot of good hikes.
Yeah.
But I went on a road trip actually with Birdie, who you mentored both of us in college. Shout out to Birdie.
Yeah.
So we went on a road trip and we went all the way up to Zion National Park in Utah. And we did a hike called Angel's Landing. And I think it's called that because the height that you climb up to, that you hike up to on this height, you feel like you're up in the heavens when you look out. Wow. And so the last half mile of this hike, you have chains. So you're single file, you're holding onto these chains to get all the way to the top. And once you get to the top, it's just the views, the mountains, just looking out over like God's creation and just being completely blown away by what God has created and just like being up there just in awe of all of it. So that's probably one of the most challenging hikes I've been on and the most scary because people aren't always the most patient when you're trying to hike up to the top, and it's single file, so people are trying to like rush past you to get up there. So it's a little scary getting up and down. But once you're up there, just the views and then being able to be there with one of my best friends at the top was just a really cool experience.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
So wait, who are you chained to? Like you said, there's chains?
They're in the rock.
Oh,
so
okay.
So there's
you're not chained to other people.
Chained. No. Oh no.
That's what I pictured.
No. Like we're on like a line.
Okay.
No.
I was like, that's serious dependence.
No.
If you're like being chained to the person in front of you and you're all single file going up in line.
It's like a team exercise. How well do you trust each other?
Yeah.
Complete strangers.
Yeah.
Just chained together.
It really is. Yeah.
No.
You know, when it comes to hiking, you just made me think about like being in Estes Park, Colorado, and I've never been to Utah. I'd love to go because I've heard it's incredibly beautiful. Even as you're describing that, I'm like, that sounds amazing. But there is something about once you get to the peak, You know, like while you're hiking at some of those high elevation levels, like you're talking, it's like, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's like that reality of like, it takes a lot of energy and more than you can even imagine. And then you get to the top of the peak and it's like, is it worth it? What would you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I love the journey up to the peak too.
Okay.
You know, I know some people just are like destination hikers. They just like to get to the view, but I actually love the journey along the way. Just usually I'm hiking with friends when I go to like bigger places like that national park.
Yeah.
So yeah, just like enjoying the conversation, enjoying the scenery along the way.
Yep.
So I enjoyed the whole journey up to the peak. But yeah, it's like a reward when you get to the top and get to see how far you've come.
So third question is, what is one of your favorite things to do on a rainy day? We live in Ohio, right? There are many rainy days in the spring and there are some sunny days. Yeah, what do you like to do on a rainy day?
So my favorite thing to do would probably be to hang out in a coffee shop with a friend, getting a latte or an Americano and just and just sipping on it, having good conversation, having some deep discussion with a friend, getting in God's word. Yeah, and just enjoying sipping on my drink when I'm there. That's my ideal activity.
Oh, question number 4 of the first 4. One of my favorite things, Gabie, is seeing videos of y'all, like you and your roommate, with doing carpool karaoke, right? And so my question is, what is one of your favorite songs to carpool karaoke to?
So my favorite song would be How He Loves by David Crowder. I'm really into worship music, and that song, when I'm in the car alone, I'll sing it. But yeah, if I'm with someone, that would be my top choice. Okay. Just such a beautiful song, good build up.
You want to give us a little snippet? No? No? Okay. Check out David Crowder's How He Loves.
I'm really shy singing in public. So.
You are not shy singing though, when it's just you and your roommate.
Yeah, I guess not.
Yeah, y'all make some pretty good videos. Yeah. All right, well, let's jump into your story, Gab. Like, being a track athlete, that's something that's pretty unique, I would say, to some of our listeners, you know, with you experiencing 4 years of being a college athlete, as well as being not only an athlete, but a student athlete, right? And taking classes in the midst of that. And so, obviously, I know a lot of your story in terms of athletes in action as well, but would you just, share with our listeners your personal testimony and just what God did in your life in college and your experience as a college athlete?
Yeah, absolutely. So running track in college was never a goal of mine. So I actually only ran 1 year of track in high school, my senior year. I did run a few years in middle school. But my focus for sports was actually playing basketball in high school. I grew up playing basketball with my dad. He was my first coach from 2nd to 6th grade. He was my basketball coach. So it was always something we did together, and just naturally I fell into playing basketball. I feel like I was naturally a good runner. And so when one of my basketball teammates, she convinced me to try out for track my senior year of high school, I was reluctant because I was like, I don't know, like it's my senior year, like why pick up a new sport, you know?
Yeah.
But I was like, well, she asked me, it's my last chance. So I decided to go out my senior year. And then I was like, I actually am kind of good at this. Like I was a high jumper running the 400 4x4. So when I got to college, I actually reached out to the track coach at Wright State, sent him an email and was like, hey coach, I've only run 1 year of track in high school, but here are some of my times, some of my heights that I've jumped, and I would love to walk onto the team if you would have me. And he emailed me back and said, absolutely, we would love to have you. And apparently he was at one of my conference meets, so he had seen me jump before. So I walked on at Wright State, and I immediately picked up with training. And coming in, I felt like I was very inexperienced because only running 1 year of track, I didn't really know what I was getting into running, being like a college athlete.
Sure, yeah.
So the conditioning, the training, the commitment it takes to be a student athlete was a lot more than I expected. Also, when I got to college, I knew I wanted to invest more in my faith. My sister was attending Wright State at the time and involved in campus ministry. So I was like, and I saw how much benefit she got from that. And so I also wanted to get involved with my faith in college and find a community. So I tried out a few different ministries on campus and nothing really fit. I didn't really everyone was super nice, but it just didn't feel like I connected well with any of the groups. And so I remember hearing about Athletes in Action. I was like, what is that? And I couldn't find any information about it. And I later found out that, Amy was going around to different sports teams, but you weren't able to come and speak with the track team for a few different reasons. And so I just never learned, none of my track teammates were active believers. So I didn't have anyone giving me that information coming onto the team. So I remember reaching out. I think I emailed you, Amy, because I found a Facebook page or something about Athletes in Action at Wright State. So I emailed you and I was like, hey, I want to get involved in this. When do you guys meet? Where do you meet? And you emailed me back, and I think we got coffee or something, or you invited me to a large group meeting.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was just really a life changer in college. It was the first time I experienced Christian community outside of my family. And yeah, it meant a lot to me. At the time, it was only a small group of us. Our large group was 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
And that was my sophomore year of college. And every week we would religiously meet to discuss we would do some study in the Bible together. And it was Amy, Birdie, and I, Birdie on the tennis team. And so that was the first time I really was trying to practice spiritual disciplines. First time I was actively reading my Bible, trying to understand what it meant to live out my faith. And not only in my life, but also through my sport. Because up to that point, I would say I was a Christian and that I had Christian values, but I wasn't really investing a lot of time into my faith. As well, I wasn't really connecting my faith in sport and knowing what that meant or what that looked like. And so having you disciple me as an athlete, and then me, struggling with just injuries and performance anxiety and yeah, just these heavy expectations that I put on myself as a student athlete, you speaking into me as not an athlete, but as an individual. You cared about me on a deeper level, not as an athlete, but as a sister in Christ. You wanted to pour into me spiritually, and I never had a mentor before, so I never had someone pour into me in that way. And so that meant a lot for me, being in that high stress environment, to have someone mentor me and care about me as an individual. So yeah, so that kind of shaped my time as an athlete, and I just really started digging into my faith and trying to learn more about what it meant to be a Christian and trying to live out my life in that way to become more like Christ.
Kind of cool. You got to be a part of the early beginnings of the ministry at Wright State. As you mentioned, it started out really small and just trying to find out who are the Christians on each team, because it's we want to be able to really invest in the believers and help them to become equipped in how to reach their teammates, And so I wonder what it was like for you as you were seeing more and more students gather in that room on campus in Med-Sci, to see students gather and sharing their testimonies and playing games together, right? Competition. Athletes love competition. But I remember we had food and competition and testimonies and people coming in to speak about the word. What was that like for you to see other college students really wanting to pursue their faith as well?
Yeah, it was amazing. Just having perspective of where we started, the small group of believers, to seeing even people on my team. I never expected to even have other believers on my team, and just having people also that interested in just having a relationship with God, like that was also a priority for them. It was just really cool to be able to like not only compete with these people, but also be like sisters in Christ with them. So yeah, that transformation was just amazing to see, and really encouraging for me as well.
Yeah.
Just to see people's hearts for their faith.
That's really neat. Yeah. Was there any like particular like scripture or like looking back on your time in college, like was there anything specifically that you felt like God really taught you personally? Like you mentioned him meeting you in the midst of injuries and some of the conversations we had and the Bible studies we had, but was there any particular, yeah, just something he kind of spoke to you during that time?
Yeah, you actually gave a lesson on this verse. It's in Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. And it talks about just stripping off every weight that slows you down and running the race with endurance. And that, like being a runner, running the race with endurance, like what does that look like? But also like my story, thinking about things, the weights in my life, the things that slow me down. Like I struggled a lot with perfectionism. I mean, I still struggle with it. It's not something that easily goes away. I struggled a lot with anxiety from like a young age. That was pretty like pervasive, like in my life, even through sport, academics. So just feeling like all these things that weigh you down and try to create a barrier between you and like living out your life for God. So I think that was like a really impactful lesson that you taught. And that was kind of my staple verse, like through college and just like trying to fix my eyes like on Jesus, like as I was competing, like I'm not going to be competing for my coach's approval. I'm not going to be competing for my teammates. I'm not going to be competing just for myself, trying to hit the next. Obviously, I want to run a better time, hit a better mark in high jump, but that's not the end goal. I need to keep my eyes fixated on God, and as long as I'm competing for him, and I know he was showing up for me too, but that was my priority. So I think just like a change in perspective started my sophomore year in terms of like why I competed, and even going through like all of those, I continued to have anxiety, and I continued to like struggle, with just like the stress of being a student athlete, but it was more manageable knowing that I didn't have anything to prove. Like God loved me regardless of if I didn't run a good race or if I didn't hit the next mark in high jump, that I was still loved and cherished by God.
Yeah, there's a peace and like a security, right, that comes with that, knowing that no matter how well I perform today, that God loves me. Like that will not change. So I love that God used your experience as a college athlete, like something that he's gifted you in, right? Is that you can run well and you jump well, right? Coach saw that in you. And so that's a blessing. But in the midst of that God internally kind of just work that out in you to see like, no, like I love you regardless of how you perform. And it makes me think of Gabie, it makes me think of that the story of Peter. Like Peter's one of my favorites in scripture. And just his story, like in terms of Peter's in the boat, right, with the disciples. And there's a sense of where Jesus calls him out on the water, right? Jesus shows up, which is crazy cool. And I don't even know how that really happened, right? Jesus just appears on the water, and they're in the midst of a storm, and Peter starts to walk, the story. But Peter gets out of the boat, and like, what does it look like for us to get out of the boat? But even when we do get out of the boat, there's a reality that a lot of times there's circumstances or people's opinions that we start to look at. And it's so easy to take our eyes off of Jesus. And what happened the second that Peter took his eyes off of Jesus? Yeah, he started to sink. And it's so relatable, right, in our own life. And so that verse you're talking about, how God showed you in a real way, like that he wants us to keep our eyes fixed on him, even though people's opinions may shift and change, or our circumstances or our performance may shift or change. And there's so much peace and security and joy that comes with that. So
Absolutely.
I think it speaks to me and it speaks to those that are listening. So it's like,
Mhm.
what is something that maybe you're starting to fix your eyes on where Jesus is saying, or God is saying, hey, I want you to bring your eyes back to me. Like, I've got this situation. And there might be anxiety that's rising up, right? Like you were talking
Mhm.
about there, Gabby, and or even there might be control. Like, I just want to control the situation. And so I wonder if God might be saying to someone today, yeah, you see the situation, but God sees the situation. And what does it look like to bring your eyes back to him? And I think he'll give them peace.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely.
well, Gabby, like, seriously, huge blessing for me to get to pour into your life in college. And one of the things that I'm super grateful for is what I didn't expect, right? Is that God would continue our friendship. And so let's continue your story as we yeah, just consider what life's like for you after college. And yeah, so go ahead and bring us in. What were your next steps after college, and what did community look like for you? One of my thoughts, Gab, is actually that most college students that I see when they graduate, specifically the students that were involved with Athletes in Action, I hear this question often. It's, how do I make friends? Because as a college athlete, your friends are naturally just given to you, right? There's a sense of like, here's your teammates, you spend a lot of time with them. So, yeah, what did life look like for you after college, and how did you make friends?
Mhm. So after college, I feel like I had a travel bug. I just wanted to like go and see the
Yeah.
country. And so right after I graduated from Wright State, I traveled to Seattle. So I lived out in Seattle for 4 months with Tanya and Nikita, AIA people. So we lived right next. Lived right next to UW, and so I commuted on my bike every morning to work. And I
Hmm.
was a camp counselor for 4 months in Seattle. Then I got home and I was like, I want to do something else. I'm not. I'm not satisfied
You
yet.
do have an adventurous side to you, though, I must
I
say.
do.
And
I
you
do.
did live at your parents' house all through college.
I did. So
You were a
it was
commuter, right?
time to branch out.
Yes.
Time to
Which
see
was a
things.
blessing,
Oh yeah,
but you were ready to go, like,
exactly.
to experience new things.
Yes, yes. And so I got home, and then just a few months later, I left to work for AmeriCorps for 10 months.
Hmm.
And so I was stationed out in the southwest region of the US, various states, and did a variety of different projects. Worked at some boys and girls clubs, did disaster relief work in
Hmm.
Texas, did a construction project. Never thought I would be in the construction field.
Were you wearing a hard hat?
I
Was that part of it?
was. Yeah, I was. Can you
Glad
imagine
I'm glad you
that?
made it out alive. I'm just
Thank you.
saying.
Thank you. So yeah, it was just a really great time connecting with people from a variety of different walks of life. So it was all young adults,
Mhm.
but we lived and worked together. So I had a team of 10 to 14 people. We would go and work on our projects for, a typical 8-hour day, and then we'd go home and spend the rest of the day together.
Wow.
So it was literally like I was working and living with a family
Mm.
essentially, and just learning to live and work with a very diverse group of people. The only thing that we had in common coming in is that we wanted to do some service and that we wanted to travel, experience
Yeah.
the country a little bit. And we had a heart for community service. So just like becoming friends and essentially family with these
Mhm.
people was just a really cool time of my life. So then I came back from AmeriCorps and I got into grad school at University of Toledo. So yeah, I jumped right into grad school, and so 3 years later, I was back in my hometown from Beaver Creek and looking for a job. And at the time, my sister was pregnant with my niece, and
Emery?
Emery,
Yeah.
yeah. And so they still live in Columbus. So I was like, ooh, there's an opportunity here. So I started looking for jobs in Columbus and did not go too well for me. I didn't really have a network there, didn't know
Mhm.
anyone in the OT field. And I did interview for one position, but it wasn't full time. So I was like, no, like, I don't feel like that's right.
Mhm.
And then eventually, after a month of struggling, trying to find a job in Columbus, my parents were they told me, they said, Gabby, just start looking back here. Cause I had a lot of connections in this area. I did
Yeah.
all my clinicals here. So within a week, I had an OT job like secured here in Dayton.
Wow.
So yeah, that was part of my story of coming back to this area and later finding out that I was very happy that I could be here. But yeah, it was just a blessing that I was able to be back in my hometown. And now, like, you're talking about developing friendships, like
Hmm.
just seeing the community I have back here. And I think the fear of coming back to my hometown was that my community wouldn't be here. Like even though
Mm.
I was thinking that if I went to Columbus, like I'd develop a community, but I'd have my sister nearby
Yeah.
and kind of like, just start with her and build my community from there. But coming back here, a lot of my high school friends were out of the area. A lot of my college friends from Wright State don't live
Mm.
in the Dayton area. And so, yeah, that was my fear that I would be kind of lonely coming back here.
Yeah.
And so I was a little hesitant, but like seeing how God has built my community here since,
Hmm.
it's just unreal to like, yeah, to think about the support and the brothers and sisters that I have like
Hmm.
locally now and never expecting to have that.
Yeah, it sounds like part of making friendships for you was taking a risk and taking
Hmm.
a step to do something that was on your heart. And what I hear you saying also is that there was some common ground. There were people
Hmm.
in AmeriCorps specifically who they wanted to serve, and so like yeah, just hearing that that could be a great way to make friends, right? Like, what are things
Hmm.
you already enjoy doing? What are just ways to even serve in the community? And you can
Hmm.
build friendships that way. But I also hear you saying you had a sister, right? Who you have
Hmm.
a sister who it's like, well, do I build my community around her current community
Hmm.
and trying to navigate if that's what's best and really just listening to the Lord, like, where do you want me to be? Right. I'm trying to start a career. So it's cool to hear
Hmm.
that he gave you a job back here in Beaver Creek and that God's really
Hmm.
used, even the other day, Gab, like you just sharing with me, I never thought that God would use athletes in action specifically in my life to
Yeah.
really allow me to have community after college. And
Hmm.
so it's not always going to be athletes in action, right? For every person, but just that you chose to just follow him and take risks and put yourself out there, right? To build new
Hmm.
friendships because the athletes in action people in your life are not necessarily the same people that you had friendships with in college, right? They're
Right.
post college
Hmm.
relationships. Can we talk about your dad? Is
Yeah,
that okay?
we can.
I really enjoy your parents. One of my favorite things was getting to travel with them. Remember driving with them to Ball State to watch your Ball State track meet, and some
Mhm.
of you compete there, and that was a lot of fun. The journey, and then also we drove to Columbus once. My friend Kate came with us, um, and yeah, your parents are so supportive of you. And I don't know if there was a track meet they missed, to be honest. And so the Culver's experience with your dad.
Yeah.
But I first would love to hear like what happened. Can you give us, yeah, just bring us into the journey of these last couple years?
Mhm, mhm. So I moved back to my hometown. So I was living with my parents at the time, and I had taken a job in Tip City, working at
Hmm.
a skilled nursing facility, working with elderly individuals primarily. And so I was driving to Tip City from home each day. And at the time, I was looking for an apartment or condo, trying to find a more central location.
Hmm.
So it'd be a shorter commute to work, but
Yeah.
also be close to family. And so at that time, I was also just under a lot of like stress at work and had a really crazy work schedule. So it was a very stressful time already for me. But then, so it was late August. My dad started to have just more significant digestive symptoms. And I remember one day he came home and he was an avid biker. So he was
Hmm.
always on his bike. So I
Yeah.
remember him walking into the kitchen after a bike ride and his face was just super yellow. And I was like, Dad, like, why is your skin yellow? He was like, oh, like, I didn't really notice or something. He was like,
Hmm.
maybe it's just, I just got done with the bike ride. He was pretty like exhausted. And I was like, huh, okay. And then he was like, also, he like started talking about some of these symptoms he had been having, abdominal pain and kind of increasingly getting worse over the
Hmm.
days. I was like, Dad, like, I really think you should just go get checked out, make sure it's nothing serious. So he actually went in the following day. He went into urgent care to get checked out. And they were like, I don't think we can do the imaging we need here. So they sent
Hmm.
him straight to Soin to get additional imaging done. And then when he was at Soin and they did a bunch of tests and images, he found out that his cancer that he had been diagnosed with a couple years back and had got radiation for, and yeah, they like told him that it was slow growing, had 15 to 20 years
Hmm.
just getting the radiation to reduce the size of the tumor on his neck. So we were all very hopeful about his prognosis. Like, it really wasn't a top concern of ours. We're like, oh, it's
Yeah.
very treatable, slow growing, nothing too concerning. But then when COVID hit, my dad didn't really follow up with any of the testing, imaging, because COVID,
Yeah.
people, other, if you didn't have to go and get your anything like checked out, like you just kind of may do just
Yeah.
because it was that kind of time. So he kind of, um, he didn't really follow up with any PET scans just to make sure things hadn't spread. So it had been a couple years. So when they went in and did a biopsy, they were like, "Yeah, this is bad. It had spread to multiple areas of his body. Was in his pancreas,
Hmm.
and his groin. And at this point, like they started to do treatments,
Hmm.
but I guess we just didn't realize like how bad it was. And like my dad was hopeful. He went along with like he got a feeding tube. He went through some radiation, chemo, but it just got to the point that he was in so much pain
Hmm.
all the time. He never could get comfortable. His quality of life really just plummeted with all the treatments. It really kind of took his energy. Yeah, just like living with that kind of pain. No one wants to have to endure that.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I got to the point that I remember my mom coming into my room like early in the morning, and my dad was like sleeping up in the recliner at the time. And she was like, Dad said he's ready to go meet Jesus. Like,
Hmm.
we're starting hospice. I called them. I'm going to call them this morning. And I remember just like getting up early in the morning and like going into my parents' room and like pulled up a
Hmm.
chair next to my dad and just like hugging him and yeah, just like, Dad, like, I don't want you to go. I want you to stay here, but also like understanding like that was selfish of me. Like my dad obviously was in a lot of pain and he seemed very at peace with the decision to go into hospice and
Hmm.
kind of just cherish the last few days he had with his family. And like looking back, I'm very thankful that he was able to pass at home and being surrounded by people
Yeah.
that loved him and being in the comfort of his home. Because I think some people, they pass in the hospital, they pass without family. Like that's really hard for
Especially during
someone.
COVID, honestly,
Yeah.
like I remember at that time there were so many people that weren't allowed to have visitors. Like I remember seeing
Yes.
pictures of family members
Right.
on the other side of the glass of like
Right.
the door of a nursing home type situation where it's
Hmm.
like we can't allow anyone to come in the nursing home
Right.
out of fear of spreading. And there may have been wisdom there, but I thought it just grieved my heart to consider family members who could not be with their loved ones, their parents, their
Hmm.
grandparents, as they were finishing their time on earth, like
Right.
just, yeah, breaks my heart. And so your dad was a man of faith.
Hmm.
He genuinely, I don't know if I've told you this, but he impacted my life. And I
Hmm.
remember coming to visit you, and just that one day, that was really like your family was so gracious, even to allow, some people to come visit your dad from time to time, and it's so interesting because um he wouldn't stop talking about Jesus, and it was like, it's like the things that he had hidden in his heart, like that it wasn't just a religion, it was like who he is. And so I wonder, like, how has your dad impacted you personally in your own faith, or even as you, like, I don't, how do you view heaven differently if you
Mhm.
do, knowing that that's where your dad is today?
Mm. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, to speak about like the impact my dad has had on my life, I mean, I could just go on for hours. And like when people
Sure.
ask me about my dad, like I just talk about his kindness, his
Hmm.
patience, how humble and caring he was. He was always someone that I could trust to go to for advice,
Hmm.
that he never judged me for things, mistakes I made. He was always just super forgiving and understanding. And I really respected my dad for that. And he was someone I also just enjoyed being in the company of.
Hmm.
I talked about him being my basketball coach. Like we
Yeah.
spent countless hours on the driveway shooting hoops together. Even during college, when I came home, he would say, "Gabby, you want to go out and throw the frisbee? You want to go shoot some hoops?" Like he just loved being in relationship with me
Hmm.
and spending time with me. And to think like, I don't know, that a father being that caring,
Hmm.
and it reminds me a lot of like what God wants with us. Like he desires
Mhm.
that relationship with us. He wants to care for and love us. And I feel like my dad was like just like a beautiful example of,
Mm.
almost like a heavenly example, like of how a father should like cherish and care for a
Mhm.
child. And so I looked up for my dad for all of his great qualities that he
Mhm.
had. And yeah, just like seeing him pass, like you said, like you witnessed it, he never stopped preaching the goodness of God. Like
Mm.
up until the time that he passed, he had such a eternal perspective with how he lived his life. Like when I, even like before he went into hospice, it wasn't like, oh, and now I'm dying and now like
Mm.
I'm gonna reconcile and like want a relationship with God
Yeah.
because of fear of like the alternative, you
Yeah.
know? It's like he lived his life with that conviction like
Totally.
daily. And just seeing him such at peace with leaving the
Mm.
earth. And yeah, I'm sure it saddened him like knowing he was leaving us.
Mhm.
And he never fully expressed that, but I knew like, I knew he would be sad that he would be leaving us, but he was like so much more joyful of what was to
Mm.
come. And that was like really cool to witness. Like it was such a sad time of my life, and I hated seeing my dad suffer, and I
Yeah.
hated knowing that he wasn't going to be a part of my life anymore. But like how could I be upset with knowing that he was going to be fully united with
Hmm.
his creator? And
Mm.
yeah, like that peace that he had was so beautiful to witness.
Yeah. Yeah, it gives
Mhm.
us a whole new perspective on heaven and each, it's like
Mhm.
he has, your dad lives in a way, I really believe that, I heard this today through a devotional I was reading, but he lived in a way that there was one foot in eternity. He really understood that this life is not it.
Mhm.
Like, we're gonna enjoy this life, right? We're gonna wanna impact people, but it's not it. Like, we're living, setting our minds on eternity, like you mentioned, fixing
Mhm.
our eyes on Jesus
Yeah.
and what's to come, and what it was like for you and your family, to watch your dad in his final, days. And but I can imagine there was much suffering, that you saw, and just, yeah, for you and your sister and your mom, and just the grief that was
Mhm.
experienced, and letting go. And so would you be willing to bring us in on some of that journey for you? And I think it can be a challenge even to see sometimes, like, where is God in the midst of suffering, or where is he
Mhm.
in the midst of grief? And so, just anything that you've been learning or that you want to share with us that you experienced. When did your dad pass away?
So
What
October 29th of 2021.
what was that like for you, even to see your dad in his final days, and
Yeah.
in post that?
Yeah. I think, like, looking back at the whole journey of grief after him passing, the initial stage of grief, I feel like I was like my family and myself, we were in shock. There's a period that you're just kind of numb and not
Yeah.
able to fully process the absence of like your loved one. And so I feel like the first year, I thought constantly of my dad, but the extreme like deep sadness didn't hit me until later on. I would say like after the 1 year mark is like when it fully hit me. And when it hit me, like my grief looked like just like very intense sadness. And I went through like a season of my life that I just really struggled to like see the purpose of my life here, and just similar to like how my dad was longing to like be with God, like that longing for me to be done with my suffering and to be united with my creator, like it was just so strong, and it was really hard for me to find contentment like in my life. And not to say like I didn't have blessings. Like I had a great job. I had, you know, I had good I had good family.
Yeah.
I had my community, but even with all those blessings, I just still felt sad. And I couldn't really wrap my head around like I think like it was rooted in just like my grief, not having my dad here, but also just like also there's a lot of grieving of like missing out on the future with my dad. Like like when you grieve something, it's like you grieve what you've lost. Like you grieve the past, but like you grieve the future as well. Like you grieve not having my dad there when I find a husband and when I get married. You grieve not being able to share your children with your dad, having him babysit. You miss out on just going and living life with that person. So I think it finally hit me that like, yeah, my dad is not coming back. And just like that longing in my heart to like be able to be with him again. And so yeah, I struggled a lot with just finding contentment in my life and seeing the blessings. I think it's hard when you're in that point of sadness to see the little blessings that happen in life because you're just so absorbed in the pain and the suffering.
Yep.
But something like I studied when I was struggling was the book of Job. And
whew.
Yeah.
It's a heavy hitter,
yes,
Job.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what is a story in the Bible I can read? Like someone who's experienced grief. Someone who I can relate to.
In massive suffering.
And massive.
Like
yeah.
All of his children died.
Yes.
Yeah, he lost everything except his wife.
Except for his wife.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, he lost his possessions, he lost his health, he lost his children.
And he was a man who loved God.
Yeah.
As well.
Yes.
I think that matters in the story. Yeah.
Yeah, God describes Job as a blameless man. And I think that makes it so much harder to understand like why we suffer, because even Job being a blameless man, he suffered all of this loss.
Yeah.
And it's like you ask God like why? Like why do you allow this suffering to happen? Like what have I done to deserve this?
Yeah.
And a lot of times like there isn't a reason why. Like when Job was asking God, God, like why are you allowing me to suffer? Why are you allowing me to suffer? And he didn't really hear anything back from God when he was asking those questions. And he never fully understood why he had to go through it all. But then at the end, like, just seeing how God rewarded Job for his faithfulness. And like, even at the end of the story, it's like, oh, it's all good. Like, he has twice as much fortune as he had before. He has 10 children again. Yeah. And he has all this livestock. And yeah, everything's back to normal. But then, like, you also forget he still is probably grieving everything he lost prior to.
Because you can't replace that child.
No.
He may have, I think he received tenfold, right? What he had before, something like that. You can go back and fact check me on that. But that specific person in his life that he lost, he did not get that person back. Right? Is that what you're saying? There was a grief there. He may have received more new children, but he still lost that relationship.
You can't replace what has been lost. Like, which is a good reminder. It's like, yeah, my dad is gone. Like, I can't ever replace that loss in my life. But then looking forward, like, there are still like blessings that God bestows on your life. Like, God still blessed Job, and Job was able to carry on his life. And and just like, he still had happiness like after that. But yeah, you don't forget the grief. You don't forget the things you've lost before. Like, it's still the pain and suffering is still there. But also something I love about that story is like when he initially loses everything and his wife is like, why don't you just curse God and die? Like, and Job is like, no, like, can we only expect to get good things from the hand of God? And he's like, I am not going to curse God. Like, I'm going to be a faithful servant. And just like thinking of my own story, and I'm sure everyone has experienced some form of suffering and pain in some way in their lives. And just in those moments when you're in that pain and suffering, realizing that you need to stay faithful to God. God is with you through it all. And that you can't expect as a Christian to only receive blessings and like good things in life. Like, you can expect hardship, but it's how you respond and how you decide to move forward after that that really shows like your faithfulness and how you view God.
That's really good, Gabie. Like, it's real. We live in a broken world, and so I don't know that God, like what you're saying, I don't know that God gives us bad circumstances. You know, I don't know that I don't believe he's saying like, I want to give you this loss. But there is a sense that where is God in the midst of the loss, you know, and as we live in a broken world, the reality is there is death and there's suffering and there's evil. There's just really bad things as well as blessings, right? And so, I was reading this morning Psalm 73, and you just reminded me of this because David went through a lot of junk. And he had people that were accusing him, people that were after him, lots of really, really negative circumstances. And in the midst of it all, of this chapter, there's one or two verses where he says, basically, I did not understand why all these things happened. I did not have perspective. And then he says, but then I got in the sanctuary with God. And later on in that same chapter, he talks about the nearness of God. And there's a sense of, like you mentioned, like we can curse God or we can cling to God. And we might not have all the answers to all of our questions, but there's something about the nearness of God. It's like, how can we, in the midst of suffering, in the midst of pain, in the midst of our real life circumstances, what does it look like not to curse God? We can be honest with him, right, about how we feel, but what does it look like to really cling to him and say, even if I still trust you? It's not easy, right?
No,
but I think it's a great landing point. There's not an arrival to grief, right? It's a journey, like you mentioned about the hiking. Like, it's not about the destination, this arrival. The destination is heaven, and I believe the destination is the nearness of God. But the journey is so important, right? Like, how do we bring these things to the Lord in the journey? And I really believe his nearness doesn't leave us, but he just wants us to know him more, you know? And so I'm grateful for your story, Gabie. Yeah, like as you think about this area for you with your relationship with your dad and your family and the loss of your dad, what do you hope for?
All right. So one of the things that I had hoped for was that I would be at a point of my healing that I would be able to celebrate my dad. So this year was actually super cool. My dad just had a birthday on May 1st. And I had a few friends who wanted to celebrate with me. And both my friends had never met my dad. I had met them both after he had passed. But because of our relationship we had together, they wanted to be able to celebrate with me. So it was just such a fun day. We made a few of his favorite things. We made apple pie, and then I went out with my mom and we got vanilla lattes and
Nice.
Culver's butter burgers, his favorite meal. And then I also just like they gave me space to share memories of my dad, and which just gives me so much just joy being able to share like how we used to spend time together and just his character and things that he loved. So yeah, I was able to celebrate his life. And looking back at a year ago, I remember just feeling very sad, like on his birthday, and didn't really have the community that I do now. So fast forwarding to this year, just being able to celebrate him and with a few of my friends that I trust and know who care for me was just really special. And actually, those same two friends I'm in an accountability group with. I don't know if you want to call it a group, but basically, we just meet up every other week and we share kind of hard things in life. We share about ways that we have been growing spiritually, but also we share things that we struggle with. And then we have the opportunity to pray over one another, to ask follow-up questions. And I think like that time has shown me how important it is to have Christian community. And I think I spent so much of my life just trying to struggle alone and not realizing that other people like care about me enough to want to hear my story and want to share my burdens. Galatians 6:2 says, share each other's burdens. And in that way obey the law of God. And so being able to just like walk with these friends and them listening and showing empathy and praying over me as I struggle through life, and me doing the same for them has just been such a blessing, and has really helped me like in the healing process, because I think a lot of my story I just haven't processed with anyone. Even like things that have been struggles in my life for years, I've just never shared with anyone because I never thought it was important enough to share, or that anyone would care enough to want to listen, or that they wouldn't understand. So being able to like share specifically about my grief and just like the daily struggle that I have, to just wrap my head around, that loss, and just the aftermath of it too, how much things have changed and with relationships and just like where I am currently in life, being able to share those things with trusted friends has been really impactful in my life. So I would say, like, looking back, if I could, and moving forward, if I could recommend anything for the podcast listeners, would be just to seek that community. Find people in your life that are willing to sit with you when you're sad, who are willing to listen, and who will gently like point you back to God. And I think, like, also, not to bring back Job, but like how his friends, like, initially they sat with him in his pain when he was grieving, but then they started to like provide some advice that wasn't helpful and that wasn't truthful. So it ended up being more harmful and it like caused Job more grief when he was already in the midst of all that.
It's almost
suffering.
like instead of helping carry the burden, they were just adding things to his backpack. Like, what did you do wrong, Job? Like, you must have done this wrong or that wrong. And they had all this advice that sometimes we do that, right? With people in our life, it's like we want to help, but we start giving advice. And oftentimes a person, what I hear you saying, just needs somebody to sit with them and just to say, wow, I'm with you.
Exactly. So find those find those friends who are going to be willing to sit with you in like the darkest seasons of your life.
Yeah.
And I think like there's, friendships kind of change as you mature too. Like friends that you were once really tight with may not be the same friends that you share things with now. So finding who those people are in your current state who are willing to walk alongside you and care for you, and then also like you caring for them back.
Yeah.
It needs to be a two-way street.
Yep.
And just having like that relationship, those relationships in life, I feel like are just so important for not only your spiritual well-being, but also like your mental health, your emotional well-being, like knowing that you're not alone in this life. Like obviously we know God loves and cares for us, but also being able to hear that from other friends as well just provides really good affirmation and provides the support you need in some of those hardest times.
Yeah, I love it, Gabie. I'm grateful that God has brought new friends in your life in this season, because even as your friend or as your mentor, over the years, like I do believe that God brought new people into that space with you. And I love journeying with you. So like, if you ever need a friend to help carry some things that are in your backpack, get to a coffee shop, maybe hit up a Pettibone, or do a little hike or whatnot. Like I would love to continue to do life with you. So I'm so grateful though that the Lord's brought women into your life that you can just regularly you guys can bring to each other what's going on. So your story's priceless. So thanks for bringing this in, and giving us that space to hear your journey. Your relationship with the Lord is sweet. Like it's fun for me to see how you pursued Jesus as he's pursued you. And going all the way back, circling back to the Hebrews 12, 1 through 3 that you mentioned at the beginning, the very first few words say, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and in the midst of that, let go of the things that easily entangle us, right? And let's throw those things off, the sin that entangles us, and let's run hard after Jesus and fix our eyes on him. And your dad is part of that cloud of witnesses. I know each of us have people in our life, right, who have gone to be with the Lord. And I really believe, just as your dad at the track meets, where he was cheering you on, he and your mom both, right? But he's one of your biggest fans. I really believe that your dad continues to cheer you on. And so I just want you to hear from me, like he's pleased with you. And even alongside that, like your Heavenly Father is pleased with you, just because of who you are. And I need to hear that from myself as well. So
thank you. That's so kind.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone's ever like provided or connected it in that way before. So that's really cool.
Yeah, he's cheering you on. Yeah, you're welcome. Well, thank you for joining us for this podcast today. Have a great day.